Hey, good morning everybody. Matt Zerby here with Wasco Nursery, coming to you on a beautiful sunny Memorial Day weekend. It is a Saturday and it's time for another episode of Coffee Chat with Matt. We're really glad you're here. This is one of our most, kind of our most requested or most questioned topic is hydrangeas. So we're going to be talking all about hydrangeas today. We are going to be talking about care, the different varieties, pruning, all sorts of stuff. So hopefully you have a warm cup of coffee or tea and you get a comfortable chair. This one will probably go a little longer today because there's a lot of ground to cover and I want to make sure that we get all the questions answered. As always, you can pose questions in the comment section, and if I can, I'll cover them here live, and if not, we'll definitely get your questions answered with a comment reply there. So hopefully that helps. We finally got some much needed rain over the last couple of days, so that's wonderful here in Northern Illinois. We've been a little light on the rainfall this spring. Here at the garden center, we got about 3/4 of an inch over the last 48 hours, so that's great. We also had some nice cool weather. Cooler than we would like for this time of year. In fact, on my way to work this morning, I actually saw some frost in a few ditches. We're in for, I think, another round of one more cold night tonight with a chance of a light frost again. So most of your landscape plants, perennials, trees, shrubs, etc. are going to be perfectly fine. They've already leafed out. They've dealt with some cold nights. I don't think you're going to have any issues at all with those. With most of your annuals, you'll probably be okay too. Some of your really warm weather loving plants, things like basil, for instance. Basil does not love anything below 50, and below 40 it's kind of lights out for basil. So if you have basil or some of those very tender plants, you may want to bring those in tonight, or at least try to cover them up if they're already in the ground and you can't bring them in. So but again, most landscape plants, perennials, shrubs, even things planted this spring, you are not going to have any issues. I did not cover my tomatoes or anything at home. Tomatoes are, once hardened off, are actually relatively cold tolerant. So we'll see how that goes. We'll know in a day or two if I have to replant my tomatoes, but I suspect they'll be perfectly fine. So anyway, I want to get started here on the topic of hydrangeas because, like I said, we have a lot of ground to cover. But first, what I wanted to do is mention just kind of an overview of hydrangeas, and then we'll get into the specifics. So I brought at least one representation, in some cases a couple representation or representatives from each category, if you will, of hydrangeas. So I want to kind of run through those quickly as an overview, and then we'll go more in depth with each individual category. So on my far right over here, I'm not sure how wide the screen is, but we're going to be talking about climbing hydrangea. So it's kind of in a group all by itself. The climbing hydrangea is a viney hydrangea. It will grow on a trellis, it'll grow on a brick wall, it'll grow on a tree trunk of an old gnarly oak or something like that. So we'll talk a little bit about those, but it's the only one that's in that family. That's Hydrangea Paniculata is what that's called. So that's the climbing hydrangea. We have a few different representatives that we're going to talk about from the group that are called Hydrangea Paniculata, or panicled, or late blooming hydrangea. Those are kind of all common names for that group. We're going to be talking about those. These are your woody or more shrubby type hydrangeas with large cone-shaped flowers typically. Right over here, I have an Oakley Hydrangea. That's Hydrangea quercifolia. So quercifolia, quercus is the oak family, or the oak genus. And so quercifolia means that it's a hydrangea that has leaves that look like an oak. And so this leaf looks like that of an oak tree. And so we'll talk a little bit about those. Right here in the middle, I have, this is called Hydrangea Tough Stuff. Hydrangea Tough Stuff is what is called a mountain hydrangea. It's a Hydrangea serrata. So we'll talk a little bit about those. Right over here, we kind of have the belle of the ball. These are Hydrangea Macrophylla. So Hydrangea Macrophylla are typically the ones that everybody is after, the the big, beautiful, very colorful flowers, highly sought after in the garden. They provide color like just about nothing else. So that's Hydrangea Macrophylla. And then all the way over here on my far left, I have the Hydrangea Arborescens, or smooth hydrangea. So that's going to be like the old-fashioned Annabelle type. We'll talk a little bit about those. So we've got a lot of different varieties of hydrangea. In each of those categories, there are many different varieties or cultivars of that specific in that specific category. So, for instance, in Hydrangea serrata, there's which is the mountain hydrangea here. This one is tough stuff. There's tough stuff red, there's tough stuff aha, there's tiny tough stuff, and there's many other varieties. So that's all going to fit under the category of mountain hydrangea. In the case of the panicled or paniculata hydrangea, we have at least a dozen varieties that we stock on a regular basis, probably closer to 20, and there's probably 50 or 100 varieties that are well known in the trade. So there's a lot of options there. Oakley Hydrangea, same thing. So there's a lot of different varieties within each of those categories, but each of those categories requires a little bit different care, a little bit different siting in the garden or in the landscape. So we want to kind of talk about each one of those things. So that's kind of the high level overview. Now let's jump in and kind of drill down and get a little more specific on these. So I'm just gonna kind of push the oop, he wants to fall over. So just going to push the climbing hydrangea here into view. So climbing hydrangea, Hydrangea petiolaris, as I mentioned, is a climbing vine. That's the only hydrangea in that group. There is another type of climbing hydrangea that is not truly a hydrangea. There's a plant, you may see it called moonlight or moonlit hydrangea, or schizophragma is what its botanical name is. So that's actually technically not a hydrangea. It very much looks like one, but it is not. So I have not included that here in this talk. So climbing hydrangea will climb up as I mentioned, a tree, a trellis, a brick wall, any of those kind of things. It would prefer part shade to full shade. It does not really like to bake in the full sun. I love it on wooded properties. I love it in well-established properties. It does very well there. One of the things that I really like about this hydrangea is, and you can see this a little better, and we're going to talk about this on some of the other varieties, but you see it has this very large flower, and it's almost fuzzy in the middle. And then right along the perimeter, you have these smaller flowers. These smaller flowers are what are called showy flowers or attractors. So these are what attract the insects to the flower. So these are going to be your pollinating insects. So butterflies, honeybees, in some case just flies, it depends upon the type of plant. Hummingbirds, all of those are pollinators. But in this case, you have a handful, just a few little showy flowers along the outside. And then in the inside, you have all of these fertile flowers. So the showy flowers are sterile. There's no pollen on them. They're just there to call attention to the flower so that the insect wants to come over, or the pollinator wants to come over. And then on the inside here is where all of the fertile flowers are. So this is where all the pollen is. That's where the insects are going to get their food from. And so in the case of climbing hydrangea, you have a very large portion of fertile flowers. So great for the pollinators. They love that. You can see some of these haven't even opened yet. So like on this one here, we just have these tiny little balls in the center. Those are going to be the fertile flowers. And then you just have a few of these showy flowers starting on the outside. So that's really neat. One of the things that is not real common or commonly known about climbing hydrangea is that they also make a wonderful shady ground cover. They do not need a tree to grow on or a trellis or anything to grow on. They will be perfectly comfortable growing prostrate along the ground. They'll also sort of cantilever out over retaining walls, which is kind of neat. So if you have stone walls or ledges or something like that on your property, or you're just looking to cover a fairly large area in the shade, the climbing hydrangea might be a really good choice for that. The bark, it has a naturally exfoliating bark, which is very pretty. So it's kind of brown and tan and peeling. So even in the winter months, it's beautiful. So climbing hydrangea is a great plant if you site it right. Again, part shade to full shade. And other than that, it's a pretty low maintenance plant. It doesn't really require much of any pruning at all. Basically just trim out any dead branches that you may find in it. Aside from that, you really don't need to do any pruning or any real care or maintenance. It is not a real finicky plant once it gets itself established. So that's the climbing hydrangea. Next, I wanted to jump over to the Oakley Hydrangea. So Hydrangea quercifolia, the Oakley Hydrangea, there are all different varieties in there, all different shapes and sizes. We have some dwarf Oakley Hydrangeas like Munchkin, let's see, Ruby Slippers. Some of those are nice small Oakley Hydrangeas. Then we have the normal larger ones, things like Alice and Snow Queen. Those are going to be some of your larger ones. Oakley Hydrangea are a great 4-season landscape plant. When I say 4 seasons, I just mean it hits, there's something interesting happening all year long. So in the spring, you're going to get these nice little fuzzy white leaf buds that are going to start to open up, and then they emerge to these beautiful oak-shaped leaf, large leaves. So that's really nice in the springtime. In the summer, you're going to get really nice, large, white, cone-shaped, fairly narrow, cone-shaped flowers. Oak leaf hydrangeas bloom on old wood, which means that you do not want to trim them in the springtime, or you will cut off their flowers. So you kind of let them go. Mine are already starting to set some flower buds at home. I'd say the flower buds are only 1.5 inches long right now. But with the heat coming, hopefully here in the next couple of weeks, those flowers will continue to push, and then kind of a nice early to mid-summer blooming hydrangea. The hydrangea flowers typically will start out white and then fade to a bit of pink. Some of the varieties are a little more pink or quicker to turn pink than others. So things like the Ruby Slippers or Gatsby Pink, which we're currently out of stock on, but both of those turn pink a little quicker, but all of them generally will be white, and then they start off kind of green, then they go open to full white, and then they'll fade to a nice pink or sort of almost mauve type color. Then you're blessed with some beautiful fall color. So the fall color on these, brilliant orangey red, I would say for sure the nicest fall coloring of any of the hydrangeas. Sometimes it's orangey red, sometimes it's a maroon or burgundy, but it's always pretty on the Oakley hydrangeas. So great fall color, much more so than any of the other hydrangeas. And then in the winter, you will have these beautiful exfoliating stems. So the bark on the Oakley hydrangea is very similar to that of the climbing hydrangea. So tan, brown, peeling, scaly, kind of exfoliating bark. The other thing that you get with Oakley hydrangea, and this is kind of more over time, is you get a beautiful, it's not a real shapely plant. It has a lot of character to it. The branches kind of grow out in all sorts of different directions, and you can really end up with a lot of character out of an Oakley hydrangea. Oakley hydrangea are another one that would like part shade, or part sun rather, to almost full shade. If it's dense shade, they're probably not going to be super happy, but they're also not going to be super happy if it's hot, blazing, dry, heat, that kind of thing. They're not going to love that. So I love to site Oakley hydrangea underneath other trees where they're going to get some filtered light. They do very well there. They love the east side of the house where they're getting morning sun and afternoon shade. That's a wonderful location for them. I probably would not put them way out in the middle of the open yard where they're just going to get blasted by the sun. They will not love that. In terms of trimming, Oakley Hydrangea, I always like to let them go until about late May or so, mid to late May, and then I prune out any dead wood. You can, if you have a branch that needs to be pruned out for shape or some other reason, you can do that anytime without causing any harm to the plant. But in terms of the trimming the entire plant, if you look right in here, I know it's kind of hard to see, but right in here we have last year's stem, and then over here we've got some new growth for this year on either side. And so presumably, I didn't trim this myself, but presumably right in here, this stem, the tip of the stem died back, but there were two very nice healthy buds right here. So it was trimmed back, and then those healthy buds are growing and taking over, so that's going to work out really well. It's going to be beautiful. When I had mentioned before that Oakley Hydrangeas bloom on old wood, I want to sort of expand upon that a little bit. So when I say old wood versus new wood is a branch that comes out of the ground. So for instance, if you cut a hydrangea all the way to the ground, you are going to get new stems that come up from the ground. It'll grow right back, including Oakley Hydrangea. Unfortunately, not many years, maybe 6 years ago, we had a new employee who was doing a little bit of work in our landscape beds here at the garden center, and trimmed the Oakley Hydrangea all the way to the ground. It's not the end of the world, it's just that season you're going to only have new wood, meaning you only have branches coming from the ground, which means you're going to get little or no flowers whatsoever. So old wood means it's a new branch that comes off of an older branch. So in this case, this is old wood, and so these branches that are here that are coming off of that stem are considered old wood. They will produce flowers. So old wood branches are going to produce flowers. New wood branches are very unlikely to produce any flowers in that first season. The following season, they become old wood and then have the potential to produce flower buds. So that's just a little bit on that. We'll talk a little more about that when we get over to the Macrophylla hydrangeas as well. So Oakley Hydrangea, great four-season landscape plant, lots of character, lots of color, something interesting happening just about all season long. In terms of the type of soil for Oakley Hydrangea, I would say average soil. They don't have a lot of specific requirements. They're not going to love a very wet location. So shady underneath trees is fine. A little on the drier side is fine for them. Not a real soupy kind of soil for them. They are also not as finicky as some hydrangeas in terms of soil acidity. They would like a little more acidic soil, but they definitely are not as finicky as some of the other varieties. Again, we'll talk about that here in a little bit. So this is one of the mountain hydrangeas here. This is called Tough Stuff. Mountain hydrangeas and the Macrophylla hydrangeas, which we're going to get to next over here, are very similar, very closely related. The mountain hydrangeas, I think, just adapted over time more in mountainous regions. They tend to be just a little more winter hardy, between 5 and 10 degrees more winter hardy. Aside from that, they are very, very similar in terms of their care, their soil requirements, all of that kind of stuff is basically the same. So we'll kind of talk about these all together, even though they are two separate groups. Again, I wanted to show you here, this is what's called a lace cap flower. So when you hear someone talk about a lace cap hydrangea, again, similar to the climbing hydrangea, lace cap means you have this ring of showy flowers. Those are, again, the attractors. So big, colorful flower petals that are going to draw attention to bees and hummingbirds and butterflies and all of the different pollinating animals, if you will. And then in the center, you're going to have all of these fertile flowers here. They have not fully opened, so they're just getting started. So the fertile flowers aren't fully open. The showy flowers are basically fully open at this point. Here in the next couple of days, these will open up. There will be pollen in there for the pollinating insects to get to. Tough Stuff and the rest of the mountain or serrata hydrangeas, they are acid loving. And the interesting thing about these types of hydrangeas is that they're basically little pH meters. They will tell you what the pH of the soil is, more or less, based on their flower color. If the soil pH is, if it's more acidic, that means, so if you go back to your chemistry lessons, and hopefully my teacher friends are watching and will agree with me here. So 7 is kind of the threshold there. Anything above 7 is considered basic. Anything 6.9 or below, or anything below 7 is going to be considered acidic. Hydrangeas would like it more in the 5.5 to 6.5 range, especially these like the serrata and the Macrophylla type hydrangeas. So if these are growing in a more basic soil, you're going to see more pink in the flower color. If it's more acidic, you're going to see more blues or purples. So that's kind of the, when I said it, they're kind of like a little pH meter. Just to give you an idea, and I know that we've got people watching from all different areas, but here in northern Illinois, specifically in our part of Kane County, we have naturally a very high pH soil. Our soil is very alkaline. So our soil pH tends to be between 7.2 and 7.6. So there really is not, at least here, a big reason to go out and buy a soil test kit, although we do sell those little things. You can send your soil off to get tested by a variety of different labs in places like the Farm Bureau or Soil and Water Conservation District. But there really isn't a big need. I can just tell you that around here you have a very alkaline soil between 7.2 and 7.6. So if you want pink flowers, don't do anything to those hydrangeas. If you do want the blue and the pink, or the blue and the purple colors, you're going to need to drive the pH down to a lower number, so somewhere in that 5.5 to 6.5 range. So that's what's going to give you that bright color, is the soil pH. One of the interesting things about the hydrangea is the thing that makes the flowers that blue color actually isn't necessarily the soil pH itself. It's the amount of aluminum ions that the plant is able to take in. So it's actually aluminum that is what makes the flowers blue, or more towards the blue side of things. So the aluminum in the soil will make the flowers blue. The low soil pH is what's going to allow that aluminum to be absorbed by the plant. In higher pH soils, some elements, namely aluminum, but also things like iron, are not available to a plant. They're chemically bound. The ions are bound to other elements, or they're bound in such a way that the plant can't take it in. It's there, it's in the soil, the plant just does not have the ability to pull it in. When you lower the soil pH, that bond will break and the plants are able to take it in. So we recommend soil acidifiers for plants that are struggling with some of those types of issues, or if you're just trying to make your hydrangea blue, you're going to want to use something like this right here, which is called soil acidifier. It's basically an aluminum sulfate product. So sulfur drives the pH down. Aluminum, as I said, makes the flowers blue. You can't just use sulfur. Sometimes people come in asking for sulfur. Sulfur on its own is a deadly element. You can't just have sulfur. It has to be with something else. So you could use something like this right here, which is aluminum sulfate. You could use iron sulfate if you had an iron deficiency problem, but in the case of hydrangeas or blueberries, things like that, we love to use this aluminum sulfate, those types of products. So that's what this soil acidifier is. I generally tell people to put it down about twice a year in our area. You can put it down as much as 3 times per year. Basically just rake the mulch away from the plant, sprinkle the soil acidifier down, maybe even just work it into the top ½ inch of the soil, water it in, and then put your mulch back on top of that. The hydrangeas, you will actually, if you don't do this, if you started with a plant that was on the blue side and you put it into a higher pH soil, you will see over the course of the season the flowers getting more pink, more pink, more pink, because the soil pH, as they're adjusting to the new ground, they're starting to get roots into the higher pH soil than maybe the soil pH of the potting mix that is in the plant. So quick chemistry lesson there. Hopefully that made sense. So that's Hydrangea serrata. We're going to talk about the care of the Macrophylla and the serratas together. So we'll get to that here in just a minute. So. All right. So the one that typically everybody wants to have and everybody wants to know about how to care for them and everything is the Macrophylla Hydrangea. Macrophylla means big leaf, basically. So they do have larger leaves. They are a little more water-hungry hydrangeas than some of the others. They do have very large flowers. Again, the Macrophyllas are split into two groups. There is the lace cap hydrangea, which I just mentioned. So lace cap meaning fertile flowers in the middle, sterile ring along, or fertile in the center, yeah, sterile ring along the outside. This is what's called a mop head hydrangea. So mop head is sort of a subgroup in the Macrophylla family here. And so mop head means it has this very large, rounded flower. On the mop head type hydrangeas, you have many, many times more sterile, showy flowers than you do the fertile inflorescence. So you're going to have, depending upon the variety, big, luscious pink or blue or purple colored flowers. This one right here is called Summer Crush. So Summer Crush is part of the Endless Summer series. So Endless Summer, they were born and bred up in the Twin Cities where they had been breeding Macrophylla hydrangeas, which if you've ever been out along the coast, you know, Martha's Vineyard, really anywhere along the coast, but you know, you see these beautiful, beautiful hydrangea bushes that are 4 to 6 feet high and maybe have 100 or more big, beautiful pink and blue flowers on them, things like that. And then you try to do that here in the Midwest, and most people fail miserably. So Endless Summer, they had been breeding a variety of different hydrangeas together, trying to get them to do two things. One is called remontancy, and a remontant hydrangea is a hydrangea that will rebloom. So remontant basically just means reblooming. So it'll set its flowers once, and when those are done, it'll continue to set more flowers. So they were trying to breed remontant bloom, so reblooming, and they were trying to breed for more hardiness in the plant. So the original Endless Summer was, I would just say, only moderately or even mildly successful for those of us in the Midwest. The Endless Summer in mild winters does perfectly fine. And will bloom, but in more harsh winters, most of the flower buds get nipped off, and it just doesn't. It does not rebloom. Some of the later versions of Endless Summer, like Summer Crush and Bloomstruck, happen to be, in my opinion, a little better in terms of their ability to rebloom. So that remontancy is a little stronger in them, and then their hardiness is a little bit better. So they do bloom or rebloom a little better in our area than some of the than the original one. Now, if you go with, say, something like there's a variety called Nico Blue. So Nico Blue has been around forever. Nico Blue basically will never bloom in northern Illinois, ever. It almost always dies to the ground. It has zero remontancy, you know, kind of built into it, if you will, or bred into it. So that it basically, you plant a Nico Blue, maybe you saw it at a store somewhere. We don't sell them here. We really never have. But you buy it at a store somewhere and it's got big, beautiful blue flowers. And then you take it home, you plant it in the garden, and then the next year you have this big, green, healthy bush with no flowers. That's what you're going to have forever. Forever and ever. It's just never going to bloom in our area, you know, unless we have a winter where it, you know, basically doesn't get below 10 degrees or something like that. It's just not going to happen. So Nico Blue, you basically will never have any flowers on. The other one that you'll never have any flowers on are what are called Florist Hydrangeas. So if you were given a hydrangea as a gift, or you bought one at the grocery store because they had big pink or red flowers and just caught your attention, and you kept it on the kitchen table for a couple of weeks or months and it was beautiful, and then you decide to plant it in the garden, as many people do, that plant will also most likely come back. It will grow in the soil. It'll grow in our winters. It just won't bloom here. So again, you will have a big, healthy green plant with no flowers. So if you're trying to get those these big, beautiful flowers, you're going to want to go with something that has more cold hardiness. So Summer Crush Hydrangea right here is hardy to 30 below zero. So definitely a lot more hardy. It also is a very remontant hydrangea. It will rebloom. Remontant also means that they will bloom on both new wood and old wood, although I think that's maybe not quite as accurate as some of the breeders would like it to be. But they will bloom on new wood, but nowhere near as well as they bloom on old wood. These types of hydrangeas would love morning and maybe some early to midday sun, and then shade in the afternoon, or just kind of part sun throughout the day. Maybe it's a situation where there's trees that, you know, block it here and there, so it gets some decent sun and then there's shade for a period of time. You can put these in full sun. It's pretty tricky to get them to grow in full sun. Once you get them well established, they'll do okay. But what I want to talk about with hydrangeas is this type of hydrangea will wilt under two conditions. It will wilt when it's dry, but it will also wilt when it's just very hot. And it's very important that everybody that grows these understands that, because one thing that will get you to not get blooms, not sure if that was good English there, but if you baby these plants too much, if you overwater them, over-fertilize them, take too good of care, they'll never bloom. One of the things that gets the hydrangeas to bloom is a little bit of stress. A little bit of stress will get plants to bloom better. So in the case of these hydrangeas, a lot of times you have these planted and it's a hot sunny day, and let's say it's over 80 degrees, and you go and you look at your Macrophylla hydrangea and all the leaves are wilting. It doesn't necessarily mean that the plant needs water, but that's generally most people's first instinct, is to run out there, pour a bucket of water or get the hose out and run the hose there for a little while. And you will see it perk up and you say, look, Matt, you were wrong. It did need water. But that's not exactly true. What you did is you just cooled the plant off. You cooled the plant off by giving it some water or by hosing it down. But what that plant was telling you is that it was really hot out. That's it. So I always like to use the little analogy or kind of compare it to humans. So we sweat when we are hot, right? But sweating does not necessarily mean that we are dehydrated. It just means that we're overheated. I could be very, very well hydrated, but run a lap around the garden center and I'd be sweating like crazy. And it's not because I'm dehydrated, it's because I'm overheated. And as soon as the whatever caused that overheating goes away, so in my case, if I stop running laps around the garden center, I'm going to stop sweating. And in the case of the hydrangea, if the sun goes down or the temperatures drop, the hydrangea is going to perk back up and it will no longer be overheated. Now, if those leaves are still wilty in the morning, then the plant is dehydrated. Then it does actually need water. So if they're still wilty once the sun goes down and it's been cool for a couple of hours, then you can go ahead and give it a good drink of water to perk it back up. So that's just a little tip and trick on watering and care for these guys. So we talked about soil acidity. These like the more acidic soil, especially to get the vibrant colors out of them. They don't like to be babied. In terms of winter care, that's generally, winter care and pruning are typically people's big questions. So I want to address that. The winter care for these is as follows. First of all, do not prune them at all in the fall. So zero pruning. One thing that pruning in the fall does, the stems of these hydrangeas, it's fairly hollow in the center. When you snip off one of these stems for whatever reason, you cut off the dead flowers or you just trim it back, you open or expose the inside of that stem, which allows it to dry out over the winter time, because winter, you know, our humidity is much lower in the winter. Obviously it's cold. Just like our skin gets chapped and things like that, the same thing happens to the tissue on plant. So if you leave that stem completely intact, you will have far less what's called desiccation. It basically just means drying out. You will have far less desiccation if you do not trim those stems in the fall and you leave that protection there all winter long. So that's number one, no pruning in the fall on these hydrangeas at all. In terms of other protection, at the very least, I like to put a nice little layer of mulch around the base of the plant, 2 to 4 inches thick, kind of mounded up along the center of the plant, which we would call the crown. That'll help protect the root system and the stems in case it's a really awful winter. That's going to help. The other thing that you can do is you can take a piece of chicken wire or something similar and wrap it around the exterior of the plant, and you can fill that chicken wire with leaves. Any leaves from the yard, doesn't have to be anything specific. So if you have a maple tree in the yard or an oak tree or whatever, just wrap it around with the chicken wire and then fill it with leaves. That's going to give it a nice insulation blanket for the winter time. And then we would take that chicken wire and those leaves, we would take that off in late March, early April is when I normally like to do that. Now you're going to say, should I trim it then? Once I take off the chicken wire and the leaves and thin the mulch back out, should I trim it at that point? No, I don't want to trim it at that point. In fact, I'm going to grab another sample over here of a larger hydrangea that still has some stems, and we'll talk a little bit about pruning them. But we don't want to prune it yet. We want to wait until about this time of year, actually. Sometime between typically early May and Memorial Day is sort of the time when we would want to prune the hydrangeas back. So what we're looking for, we've got last year's stem is kind of a tan or brown stem. And if we, let me just grab this other plant. I will be right back. All right, thanks for bearing with me. Okay, sorry, I left this one on the cart over there and wanted to use this as my demonstration plant. So, on this particular hydrangea here, this is a Macrophylla hydrangea, and you can see all of these stems from last year. It's this grayish, tannish stem. That's old wood. Now if I spin it around and we look right down here, this stem is coming right out of the ground. So that's new wood. So new wood and old wood. Now, if you look right over here, the top of this stem is dead. There's no, the buds that were here, the buds that were there have died and dried out. But this bud was very healthy and started growing, and in fact, has a flower bud on it. So it's coming off of an older stem, so we call it old wood. They bloom better on old wood, like I mentioned. So that's why we have this flower bud already starting. This particular hydrangea has not gotten any greenhouse heat. The one that I had been showing you, this one here, has been growing in the greenhouse all spring. That's why it's all lush, green, and already blooming. But, as I mentioned before, it's been a little cooler spring this year, even though we've had a few warm days, but this is totally natural. This is what you'd expect of your Macrophylla hydrangea. And this is actually the time of year when I like to trim mine back. So I just go out into the yard and I start to look at them, and I'm looking for these stems and I'm looking for that nice healthy growth, and then I'm just trimming right above there so that I've got that nice stem growing. And I kind of go through and I look, and I've got another big dead stem over here. And so I'm just pruning a few inches on the outside of that and just snipping it back. Now, some years, you know, let's say the polar vortex winter a couple winters ago, we had stems that were basically dead all the way to the ground and only a little bit of green growth at the bottom. That was a rough winter. You will have to cut it all the way down to the ground or right to where you see this healthy green new growth coming out of the ground. So this is all new wood happening down in here. But this particular plant, it survived, these stems survived the winter, as did mine at home. This past year, we had a relatively mild winter, all things considered. And the only time that we had a cold period, we had several weeks of pretty tough cold, but we had a nice 2 to 3 foot blanket of snow. The snow was protecting all of these stems. The same protection that you would get out of doing the chicken wire and the leaves on the inside, the snow does the same thing. But we unfortunately have not reliably had good snowfall cover over the last several years. That's why I like to do the chicken wire and the leaves. But if you didn't do that and you just had that blanket of snow, most people will notice that right up to the snow line, they have nice healthy buds on those stems. And above the snow line, the tips are dead and dried out. That's perfectly fine. You'll probably have very good flowers on those hydrangeas this year because it was a very mild winter, and the cold period, we were the ground was blanketed with snow, and so the plants were nicely protected. And then that's it for care on these hydrangeas. One thing I like to tell people is do not over fertilize them with nitrogen. Nitrogen is what promotes healthy green growth, but the more healthy green growth that the plant is getting, the less likely it is to flower. So you're going to, if you are fertilizing these, you're going to want to use something that is lower in nitrogen. Nitrogen is the first number. You know, if you had a 10-10-10 fertilizer, that first 10 means that it's 10% nitrogen. So we want a lower nitrogen fertilizer, maybe something higher in phosphorus, like a blossom booster type fertilizer would be great for these 1 or 2 times a year. I really like to use an organic fertilizer called Hollytone. That's a really nice hydrangea food. So I sprinkle that down twice a year, spring and fall. So March, April, I sprinkle some around the bottom. September, October, I sprinkle some around the bottom. And that's about all I do, aside from if you want to acidify the soil, you can use that soil acidifier. So those are my care tips for the Macrophylla hydrangeas. If you're trying to get those big, beautiful, colorful flowers, don't trim them in the fall. Try to protect them over the winter if at all possible. Wait to trim them until you're seeing that new growth coming out, which sometimes is very late into May. Then you can go ahead and trim them back. So I hope that helps give you some good growing tips for the Macrophylla types. Okay, so the Macrophylla hydrangeas, like I kind of mentioned, they're sort of the divas of the garden. The next two hydrangea groups that we're going to talk about, if you are not up for all of the care and the maintenance and the finicky nature of those Macrophylla hydrangeas, then the next 2 groups are what you're going to want to pay attention to. The first group that I have up here is going to be the Paniculata or panicled hydrangea. So panicled hydrangea bloom a little bit later in the season than some of the other hydrangeas, so you'll also sometimes see them called late blooming hydrangea. So either panicle hydrangea or late blooming hydrangea. These are woody plants. These stems survive the winter. These can take, if you have a full sun situation, these are the hydrangeas for you. This is obviously a container grown plant, but we do field grow. So out in our wide open fields, we grow Paniculata hydrangea in our open fields for landscape situations. So we're growing these larger hydrangeas in the ground, totally open and exposed, full sun all day long, 0 winter protection, no real care or maintenance aside from a little bit of pruning and shaping once a season. That's all that we do to them out there in the field, and they grow wonderfully. And you can have the same experience at home. So this particular hydrangea, this is called Little Lime. So Little Lime is actually a dwarf panicled hydrangea. So there's dwarf panicled hydrangeas and standard panicled hydrangeas. The standard varieties, depending upon which one you're looking at, are going to be anywhere from, I would say, about 5 to 10 feet tall. Most of them are going to be about 5 to 7, roughly. But you'd want to check the tag, look at the particular plant that you have your eye on. They will get covered with cone-shaped, mostly white, although in the case of Little Lime, it kind of starts off a greenish color, then goes to white, and then gets a little hint of pink to it when the flowers are fading. So green, then white, then pink. Little lime is going to be in that 3 to 4 foot range at full maturity. So it's definitely on the smaller size. I think 3 foot is a kind of a good average size for a little lime. There's also a little quickfire. This is little quickfire. So little quickfire and little lime are really similar. Little quickfire, or the quickfire hydrangeas in general, quickfire are white but then turn to pink or kind of a pinkish red very quickly, thus the quickfire. So there's little quickfire and regular quickfire. Little quickfire, 3-ish, maybe 4 tops, but 3 to 4. Pretty small, pretty compact type plant, where the standard quickfire will be more in the 4 to 7 foot range, so bigger in every stretch of the imagination than little quickfire. But again, these can take full hot sun to partial sun, or even light shade. They're not going to want full shade for sure. They will want 4 to 6 hours of sunlight or more in order to bloom and perform well. But they can take the hot, they can take the dry soils. They do not need any winter protection. They do not care about your soil pH one bit. You don't ever have to acidify the soil or do anything to them. They're not, you can always fertilize a plant, but they're really not, these are not finicky plants. They don't have to be fed regularly. Feeding any plant will always help somewhat. But these are going to perform really well without any real intervention on your part. As far as pruning goes, they will bloom on old wood and new wood. They're a later blooming hydrangea, so they set their flower buds later. So you can, in the late fall or early spring, trim off the dead flowers from last year or give them a light haircut to shape or whatever, and they will still bloom perfectly fine later on in the summer. So again, it just makes them kind of, for lack of a better term, dummy proof. You really can't mess up a panicle hydrangea. So little quickfire, little lime. I have a couple others here that I want to show you. So this is regular quickfire. So just going to be, just like the other one, it's just going to be a bigger, taller version of it. Still with the white and red flowers. This is one of my favorites. I have this at home in the front yard, west facing, so it actually gets south sun and west sun. They're doing very well. This is called Vanilla Strawberry. Vanilla Strawberry has these very interesting kind of reddish or pinkish stems. So even at this time of year when there's no flowers, you have these nice pink or red stems in there along with the green leaves. So you sort of get this two-tone, which I like. And then the flowers are going to start off white and then go pink, kind of starting at the bottom and working their way up. So it's almost a bicolor flower, pink and white at the same time, eventually going to all pink. Vanilla Strawberry is a medium size, so around 6 feet tall, around 5 to 6 feet wide. Again, can be pruned if you want, but it's not necessary to prune these. All I do with mine is, again, in the very late winter or early spring before they're starting to leaf out, I just trim off the dead flowers, dried out flowers from last year. Just for aesthetic reasons, I just trim them back, and that's basically it. I really don't do anything else to them. But they're hardy, they're easy to grow. I love the color on Vanilla Strawberry, so that's definitely a winner in my book. To be honest, I don't think there's any panicled hydrangeas that I don't like. They're all unique in their own right. They all perform really well. So that's the panicle or late blooming hydrangea. And then the last group of hydrangea that I want to talk about are what are called the Arborescens or smooth hydrangea. Now the Arborescens hydrangea, the smooth hydrangea, is the only hydrangea that's native in Illinois. So if you're into native plants or you're just looking for something that's really tough and durable, the smooth hydrangea are great for that. So I have two that I brought up here. This is Incrediball. The bigger one here is called Incrediball, and then this one over here is called Wee White. Now I want to just mention that the native smooth hydrangea I typically don't see much of them natively growing in Kane County, but I have seen them down around Starved Rock, down in the woods, limestone bluffs and areas like that. So they're actually very tolerant of our limey, high pH soils, our alkaline soils. They love that. That's where they naturally grow. They typically grow in the woods, so they're going to be in mostly shade or partially shaded situations. You know, maybe it's a very high tree canopy where there's a lot of sunlight getting through to the forest floor, so it's not crazy dense shade, but they're getting some sunlight. That's where they would grow naturally. So then if we transition that over to the landscape situation, they will grow perfectly fine on the north foundation, which a lot of people are always asking for plants for the north foundation because it doesn't really get any sunlight. If you have a north foundation with, but it's fairly open, and meaning there's not a lot of other trees, so it's not dense shade, it just doesn't get the direct sunlight, these will do very well. If you have a lot of older established trees, these are going to do very well. If it's hot blazing sun, it's probably not the best idea. I've seen people do it. They will do okay. I have some at home that are in the shade all day long until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then they get blasted from 4 until the sun sets, and they're doing great. So they're fine with that. I just normally wouldn't site them in a full hot, you know, morning till night, like I was mentioning before with the panicled hydrangeas out in our growing fields, where the sun comes up at, you know, 6 or 7 a.m. and they're already in full sun, and they're in full sun until the sun goes down at 8 or 9. These are not going to love that. So they would like some period of shade throughout the day, although they are pretty sun tolerant. Incrediball is an improvement on the old-fashioned variety called Annabelle. So Annabelle has been around forever, a beautiful, very well-known plant. One of the disadvantages with Annabelle is that when they were big and full of flowers and you got a rainstorm, then they would flop open. So through breeding efforts, Proven Winners has come out with this plant called Incrediball. We have basically completely switched over to Incrediball from Annabelle. We don't grow or sell Annabelle anymore. We just recommend Incrediball because you get bigger flowers on a sturdier stem. So it would seem counterintuitive to think that an improvement of Annabelle, which is flopping over, that bigger flowers would help that. But it's really the sturdy stem. The stem is thicker and sturdier than it is on Annabelle, and so they really hold up very well. Now, sometimes the first season or two, they may be a little more floppy because they don't have their roots set out here. These roots that are going laterally in the ground, that's really giving this plant a lot of support and structure. And so right now, all of the plant's roots are contained inside the pot. And for the first season, they're not going to get super far out into your soil, so that it might still be, you know, you have more upper plant than you do root system, and so it might still need a little extra help, so maybe it has to be staked, or maybe you end up with a few floppy stems. But it will be a sturdier plant than Annabelle. I really like Incrediball a lot. It is a very reliable plant. It's another one of those that if you've had bad luck with some of the other varieties like the Macrophylla, you will have very good luck with these. The flower buds are forming right in here. They're a midsummer bloomer. They start off kind of a greenish white, go to big, luscious white flowers, and then they kind of turn green again at the end and then slowly turn brown as the season comes to a close. They will get around 4 feet high, 3 to 4. They can be trimmed all the way to the ground. They can be cut in half. They don't really care what you do to them. So they're a very forgiving hydrangea. So that's Incrediball. If the 3 to 4 feet is too much for you, too tall, we have this plant right here. This is called White Hydrangea. So White is going to be in that 2-foot range, maybe 30 inches. So it's basically just a compact in every way version of this Incrediball hydrangea right here. So Incrediball at 3 to 4, White at 2 to maybe 2.5 feet tall. So much shorter version. All the same characteristics though, the white flowers, the sturdy stems, the shade tolerance, all of that is going to be the same on White. Recently, there's also been a few really nice improvements on these, or new introductions. There are now some pink blooming smooth hydrangea. So we have Incredible Ruby and Invincible Spirit and Incredible Blush. All of those are pink versions of this plant. So again, you have all the hardiness, all of the reliability, the adaptability, and the low maintenance nature, you know, in terms of them being tolerant of our alkaline soils and all that. They can tolerate all of that with either the white or the pink, it doesn't matter. And in terms of winter protection, you do not need to do anything. I generally leave these up through the winter time, and then I would say come about early April, mid-April, something like that, I'll go ahead and just take off about a third, maybe even half of the plant, just kind of trim it back. You know, in fact, if you look inside, probably doesn't show up real well, but I'll just kind of point it out. Like right in here, this is a dead stem from last year, or a stem from last year. So you can see this plant was trimmed back to about that high, and then all of these new branches have grown from that point or below. And we already have, even, you know, at this point in May, already have a really nice sized plant on our hands. So they can be trimmed back. If you want them to get big, you can leave them up and then let them grow from last year's stems. That'll make them a little bit taller for that season, but they really don't require a lot of fancy pruning or anything. One last thing that I wanted to mention that I did not mention on these hydrangeas, the Macrophylla hydrangeas, is these will do very well in a container. Hydrangeas, like I mentioned before with the Florist Hydrangeas, sometimes you get those in the little tiny pots, that type of thing. So you can very easily grow a Macrophylla hydrangea on your porch or patio if you have the right light conditions, and get these big, beautiful flowers all summer long. In fact, we have some that are grown specifically for that idea, and they come in a decorative pot. So instead of this blue nursery pot, they come in a nice decorative container, so you don't even have to replant it if you don't want to, and you can just put that right out on your patio. So they're already big, luscious, greenhouse forced plants, but they're the hardy varieties. So late in the season, you know, say September or early October, you can go ahead and take that plant out of its container, dig a hole in the ground, and then plant it. So it's really nice to get that color all summer long in the pot, and then plant it and then have it grow the following season in the ground. So that's kind of fun. We do have a few different varieties that have been grown specifically for that reason, for sort of, you know, that patio deco pot. So they're in the bigger pot. You get a bigger plant right off the bat, so they're just ready to go. And we have those for this weekend, for Memorial Day. I think they would be perfect. So hopefully that helps answer some of your questions about hydrangeas. So we've talked about the difference between lace cap and mop head hydrangeas. We've talked about what a showy flower is versus a fertile flower, and where the insects are going to get their pollen from. We've talked about the soil pH and how that works in terms of nutrient uptake in plants. We've talked about all the different varieties or categories of hydrangea, the oak leaf, the climbing hydrangea, the mountain hydrangea, the panicled hydrangea, the smooth hydrangea, and the Macrophylla hydrangea. So we've talked about all those different categories. We've talked about how and when to prune them, where to site them best. So hopefully we've answered all of your questions about hydrangeas. But as always, if you have any questions, if there's something that I didn't cover, feel free to stop in the store. We're here 7 days a week. You can stop in, pick my brain, pick any of the staff's brain. We have a great staff of Illinois certified nursery professionals. They are just as knowledgeable as I am on the hydrangeas, on the perennials, shrubs, trees, all of that kind of thing. So love to have you stop in the store. We are open all weekend. It's Memorial Day weekend, so we're here today, Saturday, 10 to 5. We're here Sunday, 10 to 4, and we're here on Monday, Memorial Day. We're going to be here just 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. So if you have a little project or something you want to get done, or you want to dress up the patio, you know, quickly before your friends come over for a barbecue or something, we're here from 9 to 2, and then we're going to go spend some time with our families in the afternoon too. So thanks again for watching. As always, stop in the store if you have questions, and we'll see you next Saturday. Be well.